next minute in case somebody joins us. My name is Kelly Premo. I am the Director of Prevention and Specialized Advocacy for the South Carolina Coalition Against Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault. I'm very happy to be here today introducing Carrie. A little bit about SCADVASA before I hand it over to her. Like I said, we are the state coalition. We work with our 22 rape crisis and domestic violence agencies across the state. So no matter where you are, there is somebody near you that is there to help. So in addition to our 22 agencies, we work with our affiliate members, we work with nonprofits, a diverse group of community partners, such as law enforcement, academic institutions, community faith-based organizations. My new best friend is Palmetto Pride. They are the litter people across the state. We're doing some really cool, really new to prevention place-based work with them. So I'm really excited to be working with them. So that's just a little plug to say that you can find partners and you can find helpers everywhere. That's a little Mr. Rogers right there. Nevertheless, we support community response teams, collaborative partnerships. We do a lot of state level advocacy in public policy, legislative issues, research. We have public awareness campaigns that I hope you guys have seen. We do prevention campaigns that I hope you've seen. And then we also have a pretty robust legal assistance program for victims of sexual assault and domestic violence. I work in prevention. We do a lot of everything I said, but just with a focus on prevention. We do a lot of technical assistance and assisting and supporting the work of the people who do the work. So I like to say we are the helper people. We don't do direct services, but hopefully we make everybody's job easier and more informed. So we do a variety of work. We're really trying to expand the type of work we do. So it's not just education in the schools, but we're working with different communities of people, like our faith-based people, like our rural communities. And then also we're starting to think about how we change the context of the community itself and how we live and move in the community to create safety that way. So that's just a little bit about us. If you know of anybody or if you ever need any assistance, any resources, any speakers, or you just want to refer somebody to help, but you don't know exactly where the help is, I encourage you to visit our website at scadvasa.org. I will put that in the chat. SCADVASA is a mouthful of an acronym. The Get Help tab will take you to our interactive map, and that will provide you with a list of all of our member and affiliate programs. Across the county in whatever county, across the state in whatever county that you're looking for. So a little bit about us. And now I'm very pleased to introduce Reverend Carrie Nettles. She's the chaplain at the Julie Valentine Center, which is where my little jumping bean experience happened. The Julie Valentine Center is the sexual assault and child abuse recovery agency in Greenville. She specializes in the intersection of trauma and spirituality. She has led workshops in Minnesota, Mississippi, New York, Utah, Arkansas, Texas, and of course here in South Carolina. She's been working in the field of sexual abuse since 2010 when she was a child advocate at the Norton Child Advocacy Center. She's associated with the Zero Abuse Project in Minneapolis, Minnesota, the Association of Professional Chaplains, and the Pediatric Chaplains work. She's worked in hospital settings and with many faith communities. And I asked her last week if she could save just a couple of minutes to talk about and kind of very roughly case study what she does with her faith communities, because she does some really, really remarkable work about creating safety within faith communities and settings, like within the people, within the structure of the faith community and within the physical space of the community as well. It's a really, really nice, like holistic partnership that she has. So anyways, I will hand it over to you, Carrie.
Thank you. Excuse me. Yes, I'm glad you reminded me. In addition to working directly with any of the clients at JVC who say, I'd like to talk to the chaplain, I I also serve as support for our staff and multidisciplinary team members who experience their own existential crisis at points along the way throughout doing this work. Um, and then the third major component of my work is to liaise with area faith communities and faith leaders. So I can bring these very presentations to the local church, the local synagogue, whomever will have me. And I also am available for consultations. And this is everything from a local pastor calls me up and says, "Hey, Carrie, we had incident. We did A, B, C, and D. Am I forgetting anything?" Right? Or maybe they call me up and they say, "Hey, we are revising and updating our child protection and sex offender participation policies, and we'd like for you to just lay eyes on it and tell us if you see any gaps," right? And of course, I do that not as an insurance agent or a lawyer, but as someone who has worked with many victims and have listened to the direct impact on them. And I'm able to offer that kind of insight. So whether it's a multi-campus mega church or a local home coven where just people gather in somebody's yard, I am responding to their questions about what does safety look like, what does prevention look like, what does good response look like in this context. So I'm available to do that for y'all in whatever capacity you are in a more localized, specific group faith gathering. And I'm happy to answer any questions about that. Tonight, I'm going to offer you a presentation, ironically called Help the Helpers, because wherever people are gathered, but especially when we gather as religious bodies, spirituality groups, when we are gathering around our beliefs and in community where there's this like shared identity and shared meaning making, that is super helpful to people in difficult times and can be some of the most hurtful places to experience not just overt abuse, right, from like a faith leader, but also responses that minimize or fail to understand, right, like the extent to which an individual is grappling with the effects of what they've experienced. So we're going to tease that out some and talk about that. I like a dialogue. So like ideally we'd be in a room together and I could like see your face, like you're about to ask me something and I'd be like, "Yeah, go ahead. What do you have, Holly?" So I won't really be able to see you as well, I think, during this presentation. So just unmute yourself and yell out if you have any questions or you want me to go into something a little bit more. Two content notes for me to make. One is I will be talking about child abuse and sexual assault because I don't know how to talk about it without talking about it. So just want to give you that awareness. I will not be going into any kind of significant detail about any particular incident of abuse. So in other words, I'm not going to slime you in that way. We're not going to get into the gritty details, but we will be making references to it. And we'll be telling the story of like unhelpful and or harmful responses. So I just want you to be aware that that's going to be part of the presentation. I'm also going to share a video. It is a clip from the Wonder Woman movie that starred Gal Gadot just a few years ago. And this particular scene that I'm going to show, I'll explain while I'm showing it later, but there will be like hand-to-hand physical fighting. And then she actually kills him. And it's not on screen when she kills him, but that it's alluded to that. So I just want you to know that that's going to happen in case you need to like not watch that for any reason. Okay. Let's see. Where's my screen? Okay. we can all see this. Okay. So to start off with, everything that I am going to talk about tonight applies really to any kind of trauma that someone experiences, though the majority of my experience is in working with survivors, specifically of child abuse and sexual assault. So, but I don't want to ever even implicitly convey that those are the only iterations of trauma. From Judith Herman's book, Trauma and Recovery, which in my field is essentially like the Bible of trauma information, trauma research. This is her definition that I use. Traumatic events are extraordinary not because they occur rarely, but rather because they overwhelm the ordinary human adaptations to life. Unlike commonplace misfortunes, traumatic events generally involve threats to life or bodily integrity, or a close personal encounter with violence and death. They confront human beings with the extremities of helplessness and terror, and they evoke the responses of catastrophe. And that is especially in the body, right? So the evoking the responses of catastrophe, sometimes people's bodies and brains will respond to trauma in ways that they don't understand. Sometimes it's because, it's been years since the actual traumatic event occurred. But the neurobiology of trauma is such that our brains are still trying to protect us when they even kind of sense the possibility of this is the same scenario that we were in when we were in danger. So I need to alert you to the danger, right? That's what it's like to be triggered. The other primary framework that I utilize when I'm talking about this comes from the work of Diane Langberg. She is a prolific writer. She is a psychologist. She has served on the board of GRACE, which is a national nonprofit, stands for Godly Response to Abuse in a Christian Environment. And they were specifically formed in response to all of the many ways in which church and parachurch organizations were responding poorly to allegations of abuse. So her framework is telling us wherever there is trauma, it is distorting or destroying one's voice, power, and connection. I'm going to get into connection more a little bit when I talk about relational consciousness, but specifically here, I'm thinking about not just connection to self, but also connection to others, higher power, and the world, the created world, right? So trauma of any iteration is negatively impacting voice, power, connection. So when we are thinking about how we help someone, we want to be thinking about what is offering a path for that person to repair, restore, reconnect to their voice, power, and connection to self, others, God, and the world. Specifically, especially with some of the local mega churches that are so big that they sort of operate in this way where they kind of funnel people into different programs. We unfortunately saw this happen so often that folks who would try to visit one of these kinds of places and maybe kind of check it out and see if it was something that they wanted to stick around for, maybe become a member of. If they ever articulated any iteration of like, well, I've got a little religious trauma, or I've got some church hurt, or anything like that, they would almost assuredly get funneled into this, oh, well, you need to go participate in this Jesus-laced 12-step group to kind of recover from this religious trauma that you have. So much so that, we created this whole extra slide of we don't want to tell people where they have to connect in a larger group. we want to offer invitational language rather than imperative language, because that is helping someone reconnect and restore their voice, power, and connection. If I am a faith leader mandating that a new person go and be part of this class that's supposed to heal them from this religious trauma, that's not repairing power and voice, right? Okay, so here's the video. Now, before I start sharing the video, I want to remind you that there's physical combat. They're fighting. This is Wonder Woman is fighting this leader in the war. Actually, let me just stop and check in with you. How many of you are familiar with this? The movie, or sort of the mythology behind Wonder Woman? Okay.
I am.
Yeah. So she is kind of in the Wonder Woman comics, and in this like iteration like that this movie has made. Here's the premise. She is the daughter of the Queen of the Amazons, Themyscira, is her mother. And the Amazons' entire purpose in life is to, or I can't remember, if all of them are just Diana. They're supposed to like stop war, right? So when they're kind of off in this like isolated ideal world where it's just them away from all the rest of the world, and then some, okay, that's good to know. Just for the new folks, hey, I want to let you know that in the course of this presentation, we are talking about the impact of trauma, and my specific location is as a chaplain in a child abuse and rape crisis center. So while I will not be telling detailed or graphic accounts of abuse incidences, I will be referring to abuse and indexing that, and then usually talking about more about the impact that it had on a particular person as an example. So because anywhere that people gather, there are survivors in the room, I just want to make sure that you know, so you have informed consent to kind of check out when and how you need to. And then I also want to let you know that this video has physical violence in it, right? Okay, so World War spills over onto the shores of where the Amazon women are living. And Diana realizes this, that there's a world war happening. Her primary purpose, as she understands it, is to go and stop Ares, the god of war. And this is not the ultimate, but kind of penultimate moment. Spoiler alert, she thinks this is Ares. It's not. But the reason I'm showing you this is because I want you to see the moment when her meaning-making framework breaks. Because that is what is happening for a lot of people on the other side of a traumatic event. Shelley Rambo says trauma makes theologians of us all. And I think that there's truth to that, even for atheists, right? There can be a sort of, why did the universe let this happen? Now what kind of existential crisis? So this clip is to show you spiritual impact and what it looks like when meaning making breaks. Oh, it's loud. It's loud. Turn your sound down. I'm going to fast forward just a little bit because I don't know how to clip something that's already on YouTube. I'm sorry.
surprise. Strange. Unfortunately, I have another matter to attend to. What are you?
You will soon find out.
Magnificent as you are still no match for me.
We'll see about that.
I am Diana of Themyscira, daughter of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons. And your wrath upon this world is over. In the name of all that is good in this world, I hereby complete the mission of the Amazons by ridding this world of you forever.
Watch your face.
I killed him. I killed him, but nothing stopped. You killed the god of war. You stopped the war.
Exactly what we have to do now.
Okay. You kill the god of war, you stop the war. Right? So I misspoke earlier. Themyscira is the island. Hippolyta is her mother, queen of the Amazons. So you hear her kind of, she, at this point in the movie, she's gone on this huge, long, hour and a half long hero's journey, right? To try and find her way to this guy and stop this world war. And then you hear her kind of, and this is part of spirituality too, right? She says, I am Diana, daughter of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, like, and my purpose here is to rid this world of you, right? Meaning, purpose, identity, these are all integral parts of our spirituality, regardless of what language or framework we use to talk about it. And then when she sees that her primary purpose, she's done her job, it didn't stop the mechanism of war from continuing to churn. We see this a lot in my work. And I dare say it would be at all child advocacy centers and rape crisis centers, although not all have a chaplain. If you are interested, those of you who are clergy who are interested in being a chaplain, consider that. We could use a chaplain at every one of them. I see a lot, especially in if you have anyone in your faith communities who was formerly Christian, something bad happens, you might see them tank out because there's a lot of really, really bad Christian theology out there. And because this is kind of a Christian hegemony, we see that everywhere, especially in the South. They have not adequately prepared people to encounter an experience outside of this, like, if you do this, then you'll be this like blessed little good Christian girl, right? Like there's no asterisk to that. There's no, oh, but there's all of these other things that occur in life, right? So any questions at this point? Next slide goes into how, can you see this or is it blurry?
See it.
I can see it.
Okay.
See it.
So when I am explaining usually to other professionals in rape crisis or child abuse field, and I'm explaining to them how our clients all have spirits and spirituality, and we should have spiritual support available to them. This is the kind of framework I use to explain spirituality in general. And so I share this here. I know some of you are leaders in your tradition. For those of you who might like illustration, in this framework, our spirituality is comprised of both our relational consciousness and our existential limits. And this is drawing from the work of Irvin Yalom, who wrote a book called Existential Psychology. Rebecca Nye wrote about the spirituality of the child, and she really digs into the relational consciousness part. And my colleague, Ryan Campbell, is a chaplain at Dallas Children's Medical. He turned their ideas into this picture. So briefly inside this box is our relational consciousness. So we are self-reflecting, self-relating creatures. And we're doing this all the time, whether we're cognizant of it or not, right? Even it can be happening on an unconscious level. And this is from the trite to the deep. So everything from like, hey, Kelly, I just got this new blouse. How does the color look on me? To something like, why didn't I cry out? Why didn't I fight back? What does that mean about me that I didn't? Okay. This is especially going to show up in the trauma survivors in your faith communities, in your family members, even if they don't verbalize it to you, right? At the same time, we are self-reflecting and self-relating at all times. We are also relating to others, good, bad, and indifferent, right? So these are the support people who love us and believe us, and these are the people who have caused us harm, and these are the strangers. If you've ever been driving down the road and someone cuts you off to the point that you thought you were about to wreck, you don't know what they look like, you don't know their mama's name, but you feel some kind of way about them, right? So this is happening at all times. Again, whether we're cognizant of it. At the same time, we are relating to the created world. And even for folks who aren't deliberately incorporating nature into their rituals or traditions or spiritual practices, 100% of people are either pausing to make sure they see that gorgeous sunset, or they're deliberately planting vegetables or flowers, or they're making sure that they go walk along the edge of the ocean and let the wave kind of lap at their ankles, or they're seeking out a waterfall to hike or going somewhere to watch the leaves change, right? People are engaging with the created world because it is necessary to our spirits, right? So we might see people running outside and making snowballs or snowmen here in South Carolina. And then finally, we are relating to God or a higher power or the universe or that which is transcendent, right? Again, as I referenced earlier, even atheists who wouldn't say they relate to God might say something like the universe, right? So we're just talking about something that is bigger and more powerful than ourselves. And, you know, for the majority of my clients who are conservative evangelical Christians, that sounds something like, why did God let this happen to me? Right? Because the implicit belief is, if I'm good and I do good things, then good things will happen to me. Right? But even atheist or agnostic folks might ask some version of, why did the universe let this happen to me? What does the universe want from me now? What do I do with this? Now, on the outside of this box is our existential limits. So the existential limit that we are bumping up against in relationship to ourselves is the expansiveness or limits of our freedom. And remember, healing trauma looks like reconnecting to or repairing a person's voice power and connection to self, others, God, and the world. So it can be empowering for survivors to come to a point in their healing journey where they realize, hey, you know, the crime that I experienced happened in South Carolina, and there's not a statute of limitations on sexual assault in South Carolina. I'm going to go file a police report. Now, that's not for everybody, but for some people, that's empowering. And they are free to go do that. Limits to someone's freedom is sometimes like, well, you know, there's not enough to obtain an arrest warrant because there's this particular threshold that we have to demonstrate to get an arrest warrant. Or a limit for my clients, for example, might be spousal sexual assault. There is a statute of limitations on that, and it's 30 days. So one would have to come to the realization that what they are experiencing is harm and criminal. And for some of my clients, it has taken years to realize that. So there are limits that exist. The existential limit that we bump up against in relationship to others is that spectrum of isolation versus community, right? So many of my adult clients, even though they can cognitively affirm, yes, I am not the only one who has experienced this kind of harm, still have a sense, it's still an isolating experience, right? And then when you think about our child clients who have they're still children when they make some sort of disclosure and we're getting them the resources they need, their brains haven't developed necessarily to the point where they would know that they aren't alone and that there are other people who have had this kind of experience and that there are helpers who would believe them, right? So if they have not yet made a disclosure and the person who has groomed them and is preying on them has said something like, you can never tell anybody else because then they'll know that you're bad. A child could easily be manipulated into believing that, right? And that has a very isolating effect. So I've had 80-year-old women come through the doors of my office and say, I've never talked about this to another living being. So even if she lived in community her whole life, there was still an isolating factor, right? For my clients who had faith communities that responded in really unhelpful and even harmful ways, that is an additional loss, right? So at a time when they need their faith community more than ever, when there's this kind of response, they've not only had this abuse that they've just sustained, but now they're also grieving the fact that they can't be with their people because they feel this rejection and really appropriate anger. Whereas for folks who are in a more trauma-informed faith community that is responding to them in ways that are helping them repair voice power and connection, every one of those moments is adding a little marble back into the healing jar. That is a reparative experience, to be in a community where you can experience a sense of felt safety. And that's invaluable. We cannot measure what a gift that is. And finally, the existential limit that we bump up against in relationship to God or a higher power is our meaning-making framework. And part of the reason I showed you the Wonder Woman clip was because that kind of spiritual impact of like, hey, this is what I'm supposed to be doing in response to this context. And then that is all of a sudden not working for us anymore. Then we have to find a way to repair our meaning making. Now what? And again, faith communities, family members can be super helpful in accompanying someone for this journey, this process of reconnecting and making meaning again in a new way. Whereas others can offer really damaging messaging around that. Any questions before I click off of this? And I can't see you when I'm sharing this, so you'll just have to unmute and shout at me. So let me illustrate what's happening like here, for example, when I still worked at the hospital and there was an inpatient adolescent unit at the time, the staff called me over there because there was a 10-year-old child who, and this is residential unit, so children living at the hospital doing school at the hospital, their beds are at the hospital, and they might get to go home and visit family on the weekends, depending on whether or not they had safe, protective family to go and visit. So this 10-year-old is in this locked facility, and they call me over and they say, Chaplain, we need you. Oh my gosh. Because the 10-year-old said to someone there that he was going to bad heaven. He was going to bad heaven. Not once in any of my seminary education did I learn about bad heaven, but context clues told me it wasn't a good thing. And it sufficiently freaked out the staff. So they called me. We spent some time working together and hopefully giving him a better narrative about who he is. But that, when we encounter people who are telling themselves stories like that, it's showing up here. It's showing up here. It's showing up here, right? Does that make sense? Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about the power of explicit and implicit messages. And this is where I'm going to give you a couple of stories to illustrate, and hearing this can be really hard. So go get some water or take a bathroom break now if you need to. That's okay. I'm not going to go into details about the actual assault that happened, but the painful messages. So my illustration for explicit messages, this is what someone says to you in response to you saying, hey, this thing happened to me. This is the case that actually propelled me into this field. I guess it was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back for me. A 13-year-old child who had run away so many times that they put her in DJJ. And during her time there, the mental health therapist assigned there, who had formerly worked at a child advocacy center, had this feeling that there was just more to her story. She had this really hard exterior. She was too tough for anything, but over time, Marie was able to build rapport with her and earn some of her trust. And she eventually disclosed that, yeah, there was a really good reason that she kept running away. It's because her aunt's live-in boyfriend was routinely assaulting her. And not only that, but that at one point when aunt finally walked in and discovered with her own eyes what this man was doing, she didn't act in a protective capacity at all. She didn't get the child to a safe place. She didn't kick the man out. She didn't call the police. She didn't do anything that we would want a caregiver to do. And then on top of that, on top of the failure to respond in a protective capacity, her explicit verbatim words to the child were, "Hush up that hollering. You are now a reprobate who is abhorrent to God." Real quick. Is anybody familiar with the word reprobate? Okay, a couple people. Anybody like, no, let's talk about it. Okay. Reprobate and abhorrent are pretty strong words, right? Especially to hear when you're 13, especially to hear from the person who's charged with your care. This was her primary caregiver. She didn't have another caregiver in this world. So you can imagine, I think, how negatively impactful that could be. I honestly don't know if this child internalized that message, or my prayer is that, you know, she had some spiritual Teflon that just kind of intuitively knew that that was BS. Nonetheless, that was the message offered her. And that's the illustration, because it's such a powerful illustration. Unfortunately, I have endless stories of the ways that not just family members, but often leaders in one's faith community have responded very explicitly to survivors in similar ways, in similarly hateful, harmful ways. Now, implicit messages are far more common and pervasive, and frankly, potentially more harmful. Not necessarily more harmful, but they're just everywhere. And so, like, for example, if you have someone who grew up going to church and all they ever heard from the Southern Baptist preacher or from the pulpit was sex is no good, very bad, wicked, evil sin, and then they experience some version of sexual abuse, then they might put those two pieces of information together and come to the conclusion that because of what happened to them, they are now also bad. Yes. Ruining a good man. Not his actions. Yes. So the implicit message is you're part of the problem, in addition to the explicit message, right? That you're ruining something. I'm really sorry anybody said that to you ever. They shouldn't have. You deserved better. My story to illustrate implicit messages. I tell about a 7-year-old boy who was at the Child Advocacy Center getting his forensic medical. Now, just to offer a little context, since not all of you are in this field, most of the time, a child's medical exam after abuse, sexual abuse, is normal. It's normal. You have a normal, happy, healthy body. It's good news, right? And the reason that we still encourage caregivers to have that medical is because sometimes children are carrying around really big fears, and the doctor can quite, clearly look at them and say, "Hey, I checked you out. You're healthy. Do you have any questions for me?" And in this one case, the 7-year-old boy heard the doctor say, "Hey, you're healthy. Do you have any questions for me?" And he was real confused, and he said, "Well, does that mean I'm not pregnant?" right? Again, because what did children do? And even adults sometimes in an absence of information, we piece together these pieces of information that we have. And if all he knew was that private parts coming together means sex and sex means babies, then of course he might come to the conclusion that what he experienced might cause him to be pregnant. And now if you overlap messages about someone's spiritual identity and relationships over top of that, how much more powerful the implicit messages that are operating inside of people can become. So the role of religious triggers, and I encourage you, if others of you have additional illustrations, I welcome them. Like I said, the majority of my clients are kind of coming from harmful experiences, specifically in the church, though we know that's not the only place where harm happens. So the topic of forgiveness can be really unhelpful, especially the way the larger society tends to talk about it, and tends to talk about it in a really ill-informed, unhelpful way. Like it's just this thing you should do no matter what, but nobody really teaches you what it is or how to do it. Or that someone else's like choice to turn around and repent from that is really disconnected from your forgiving or not forgiving, right? So there's a lot of messages particularly aimed at victims of harm, encouraging them to forgive. Or sometimes explicit messages are like, if you would just hurry up and forgive him, then you wouldn't be in spiritual distress. Countless folks I've worked with have heard some version of that. So my recommendation to anyone who is, whether it's a friend or someone in the faith community where you participate or even lead, at some point, if a disclosure comes for this kind of harm, one of the last things I do is use the F word. I really never say it until my client introduces it. And then, my response is never really a should anything. It's more like inviting them to tell me more about, well, what makes you think that? So like, if it's like, oh, I'm really struggling, I know I should go ahead and forgive them. Tell me more about that. What makes you think that? Right? Likewise with anger, again, especially in the South, especially women have really, many people have internalized this message that like women don't get to be angry, or the anger is like the bad emotion. It's an emotion, just like the other emotions, right? And it is, all of our emotions are instructive. They have helpful information to give us. And oftentimes when anger shows up, it's helpful information because anger is telling us, hey, someone crossed your boundary. That's not okay. Right? But that can be because of the ways that people have received messages about anger and whether it's okay for them to be angry. That can be a really triggering theme for my survivors that I work with. Anything that feels like confrontation. So there's like kind of a joke in the world of folks who have deconstructed and or left Christianity is like, if someone in the religious world, specifically in the church, invites them to coffee, don't go, because they're about to confront you and, tell you what your sins are and tell you how to fix it or whatever. So like, even something that seems like it has a whiff of confrontation can be triggering for survivors. So again, anything that like involves invitational language or choices is helpful, right? That kind of neutralizes some of the things that could appear like confrontation, if that makes sense. Any kind of language. So, there are religious leaders who have not only been the person doing the harming, like the actual abuse, but they've also co-opted um, religious language, maybe specific prayers or scripture, or had specific hymns playing. Anything like that falls under this kind of language category, right? And so even so I know stories, for example, of like a priest saying specific prayers, those kinds of things. This can occur for anyone within any framework, right? Anything that is special or important that gets used and co-opted into the abuse can become the thing that is now triggering and no longer a source of help. Sights and smells in religious spaces. This could be because someone's abuse happened in a religious space. And whether that's an official religious space like a mosque or a temple, or it's like the camp that we went to every summer with every other, youth group from every other synagogue in the area, all went to this same youth camp every summer. If that's where something happens, and then you have a similar space where there's similar sights and smells. Smell is honestly probably the most potent of our five senses in terms of kind of jumping us out of a grounded state. But it can also be really quick for helping us get back into a grounded state and not activated anymore, right? So one of the things that I encourage some of my clients to do is maybe to have like, if they are especially struggling with triggers, even if it's not specific to religious triggers, I encourage them to have like a little pack, whether it's a fanny pack or like a little pouch that they keep in their book bag or purse or whatnot. If you have sensory things that can go in there, like a little vial of an essential oil that smell makes you happy, right? It's not associated with anything that is triggering. Some hard candies maybe, because that can offer taste and texture and smell, and they won't melt in the South Carolina heat. Fidgets, soft and metal and different kinds of textures like that. Those kinds of things can be something that someone could quickly pull out and help use them to ground back into the here and now if they get kind of jumped out and activated by anything. Any questions about that, or anything you want to add to? These are some ways that I've seen people experience religious triggers.
Carrie, my name's Reverend Marsh McLean, and thank you 1,000 times over already for what you've shared.
Yes.
I've been making notes on, and these are too small, but I have a couple of things that came to mind when you got to this slide. And one is I worked for 3 years as a CPSS with Favor, going into the ED. So I was working with substance use and co-occurring mental health disorders and people,
Yes.
a lot of other co-occurring circumstances, many of which you're touching upon. I've taken little trainings here and there on trauma-informed care, and I really need to take a lot more. But I'm also a minister of 23 years, and a couple of things that really kind of caught my attention in this part of your presentation was how many times that we tout forgiveness. And, that's a sort of a misunderstood topic to begin with. But another one that comes up, I'm in new thought. So I'm in the arena of we can get a little carried away with positive thinking to the point where it can cross the line into magical, but also something that's come up a lot in the past couple of years is spiritual bypass. That term. So
Yes.
that's when we turn to spiritual tools to bypass necessary emotional experiences and responses to things. And that causes harm. And another piece of that in new thought is to say, well, what's wrong with your consciousness that you drew that into your life experience?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like shaming. I mean, it's really sad. There's a lot of piousness in that field. But what's wrong with your consciousness that you drew that into your experience, and you should just pray it away. And people, because I've had students for 23 years, and occasionally somebody will say, what's wrong with me that I wasn't able to overcome this
Yeah.
or manifest that.
Yeah.
So, I've kind of I've changed my tune a little bit. But seeing forgiveness up there as a trigger, that really got my attention, how that can be. The other one is that I remember having an experience with a guru many years ago. It was very short, but it was super valuable, where he was you said co-opting, things that are true, but putting them
Mm,
all together in his own special way and using them for his own power.
yes.
Yeah, and I was fortunate that sexual abuse was not part of that particular scenario. But
Yes.
even though, no, I'm not going to say that. I've had a milder experience of this, as in date rape while alcohol was involved. And I
Mild.
remember,
It's not
because that's
mild.
almost 40 years
Thank you for
ago,
sharing.
that at that time it was, it was something that you were encouraged to minimize. And
Yes.
maybe wonder if it's because you drank too much that you put yourself in that situation. So I'm rethinking that as well. But I don't know. I really appreciate what you shared. And I wanted to say the other thing is that if I have at least as many lives as a cat, I'd also like to be a chaplain before I die. But I'm in school right now for other stuff having to do with nonprofits. So thank you. And I really appreciate this, and I look forward to seeing you in the community some more.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Yes. Spiritual bypassing is um just rampant in our culture, unfortunately. Um, I, I I don't really know if I can assign all of the blame to like one place. I mean, there are like the really famous kind of Joel Osteen level folks who are kind of everywhere in mass media and disseminating messages about things that people will take in, even if they're not officially connected to any kind of religion or faith group. And then you've got like the little tchotchkes at like Hobby Lobby and Hallmark and Cracker Barrel that'll say things like, everything happens for a reason, and people will take those kinds of messages and put together a sort of Franken monster narrative about themselves and what happened. Because regardless of religious or spiritual connection to the person causing the harm or the response, is that 100% of our clients will form a negative core belief about themselves as the result of the trauma.
And
And so
in the circles that I was talking about, even though this was not specific to sexual trauma or abuse, I have heard in meetings with prayer chaplains and ministers, and I don't know that anything was done about it, that people have experienced suicidal ideation or even ended their own lives out of shame for not being able to achieve this level of faith that they were supposed to be able to have. So definitely,
that's
thank you
devastating.
for bringing that up.
I have no trouble believing it. I mean, we know that suicidality is more common among the population of survivors than the larger population. And sometimes that's maybe about like messages that they've received like that, and sometimes it could just be an attempt to regulate after a lifetime of not being able to, right? We certainly don't want to be adding to the negative, harmful messages, right? We want to be part of the liberating from those beliefs. Holly.
I think I may have shared a little bit about this last time, so just y'all tell me to shut up if I did, but I was assaulted, not sexually, but almost killed, 37 years ago. And it was somebody who was very well known and popular in the community. And he was a chef, as a well-known chef. Yeah. So there was this whole culture around him. And we were an item for a short time until he did that. But here's the concern I continue to have some pain from. I think I'm almost past it, but it is this unwillingness of people to allow you to have your experience. They did not, because of who he was. I had close friends who would say to me later, well, I know you and Malcolm had that difference or disagreement. And I'm like, he was strangling me and throwing me around the room. That's not a disagreement. But it was so complicated by other things at the time, including some custody issues with my ex. And I was so naive, and I'm thinking about, I was attending a UU at the time, and I mentioned that because we all know that there are a lot of therapists and psychologists and professors in the UU, right? At least there are here. Nobody around me ever said anything, or he inserted himself into my relationship at the church too. Nobody wants to touch that kind of problem. They don't want to admit that it could be happening that close to them. So, and the police. To this day, I had a judge that I went to, a magistrate or somebody I went to for advice because of the custody thing. And he said, or she said, you tell Mr. I'm going to say who it was. He's dead. He's been dead for years. You tell Mr. Hudson that I would love to see him in my court again. And she said, you do know he's done this before, right? Well, nobody was allowed to share anything with me. Now we have victim services. But all these years, I've wondered, what else happened? What do I not know that everybody else knows? That's all I'll say. That was enough. Thank you for listening. But I think the religious culture is part of our general society culture.
Absolutely. Especially in the US, especially in South Carolina. Yes. I want to blame the Puritans, but that's a whole other presentation. But I'm so glad you guys both brought up, and I think this is important to mention, when we're doing any continuing ed for our faith communities, it's important to name power differentials, right? So that's not just the priest and the altar boy. That's also, the person in the faith community who's got the deepest pockets, right? Or who has been around like the longest and sort of like the de facto patriarch or matriarch, right? They may not have any official power from the synagogue or the mosque or the church or the whatever, but they may have a lot of unofficial power because they have all of these connections in the community. Several years ago, we served a client who was sexually abused, and she was someone who had a lot of power in the community. She knew a lot of people. She knew a lot of the right people, if you will. She had friends in the solicitor's office, friends in mayor's office, like all of this. She had all the right connections. But he had more. And nothing came of that case. So I think particularly in faith communities, we want to be really intentional about scanning the horizon for power differentials, looking for ways that that can be pitfall, but also ways to add preventative protective measures too, right? Oh, I'm seeing. Yes. Yes, Rosie, pillars of the community, pillar to killer. Yeah, truly. So if you haven't had a chance to see the presentation I did last month for the Interfaith Partners, check that out. It is very specifically on predators who will co-opt and exploit religiosity to gain access to people. And that is true both within and beyond faith communities, right? That there's such good guys that you would never expect would do this. So, my invitation to the group is to consider in your context, the context where you participate or lead or whatnot. Or if you have a particular loved one in mind that you have been thinking about throughout all of this, I invite you to kind of take a moment to think about what could emotional safety look like for this loved one of mine. Maybe it's a member of the faith community you know is struggling with the impact of their abuse. And then I want you to kind of wonder about, do we have to continue building community the way we always have? Could we do something new or different? If that offers more avenues or on-ramps for people to participate with a sense of felt safety. So green example is like the pastor who stands at the back of the church after worship and makes sure to hug every single person who's walking out those doors, right? Like that could be like truly the best guy who's never harmed a fly and has all the right intentions, but also is obtuse to the fact that offering hugs to everyone is not necessarily welcome to everyone, and sometimes specifically those who are survivors of harm. I'm seeing some yes to new and different. I want people to be more aware, but not feel like there's not a safe space for them. Yes. Living proof of the help that one of those kits that Carrie talked about can give me. Therapist had me create one, included rubber band. I can snap on wrist. Oh, that's a good addition. Rubber band saved my life and helped me heal. I love that. I love that. Any other thoughts about how we gather as faith communities that, like, would we be willing to do something different? Whether it's changing and, eliminating a specific song because someone let us know that that was very triggering or it was used in their abuse. Or could it be like the whole way that we welcome someone into the community who's visiting for the first time? Like think big and small.
I do something because of my background with my group, and that nobody has to participate in anything when they come. And we say it every time in case there's new people. You can sit and you can observe. You do not have to sing, get up, sit down, do anything. You can simply observe, because I want people to be able to come and sit and feel safe and only participate when they feel safe. So that's a big thing that I've been doing for a long time, ever since I
love that. That is so simple and so easily added that I think a lot of us, myself included, overlook. Like, I guess, my assumption is always like, yeah, no, like, you don't have to visit and stand up and sit down and stand up and sit down and do all, like,
It gives
but
permission for overall consent of everything.
yes. And especially for folks who are brand new to a community or a context, who are really in the moment learning, like, okay, what does this look like? What are we doing? It would be easy to walk into a new place and assume if I don't do all the right things, all the same things, then people are going to kind of look sideways at me. I love just naming that, so simple and such a gift. Ooh, I want to read this book, Masks of Authoritarian Power. Yes, please. I would also welcome.
That was literally a recommendation that came. I told my family that I didn't feel very comfortable about this guru that I had been visiting. And it turns out that my brother, he just passed away on Friday. I can't believe it. That's such an interesting thing.
Sorry.
My brother had friends who had a son and the son's girlfriend. Yes, that's it. Who had run away from a teacher training in Fiji, which was no small feat, and had gotten in touch with a deprogrammer who recommended that book. So they asked permission to get on the phone with me and share their story, and I said, okay. And then they recommended this book. And of course, I never went back. It all happened in like 2.5 weeks, but it was a really valuable patch in my experience. He did every textbook thing of a corrupt spiritual leader. So
I just ordered a copy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, 2 more slides, and then I know we're almost at time. So I have to explicitly say this, especially to some of the leaders in my community. We want everyone to know, everyone, whether they're an official leader or they're just a loved one who's trying to be supportive. The survivor in your life, their journey, their exploration is not a sin that you have to confront. Anytime we treat it as such, it will further drive disconnection. It is always going to be on this side of that framework and not on this side, right? This is distorting and destroying voice, power, and connection. This is repairing, restoring voice, power, and connection. Okay, last slide is... Oh, no, sorry, 2 more slides. Okay, so here's the order of things. If we want to support someone, if we want to help them, encourage them, support their healing, we need to know that recovery unfolds in these 3 stages. Again, this is coming from Judith Herman's book, Trauma and Recovery. The central task of the first stage is the establishment of safety. So when I talk about safety, especially as a chaplain, I'm not only talking about real physical safety, right? The absence of the person doing harm in my vicinity, in my house. I am also talking about a sense of felt safety. A sense of felt safety. That means also having people in my life, family, friends, faith community, who believe me, who don't undermine me, who don't minimize or spiritually bypass where I am and what my struggle is. The second stage is remembrance and mourning, right? Again, because in our society, there are some emotions that are labeled bad. We don't do a great job at grieving and allowing others to grieve. And a crucial component of someone's healing from the abuse that they've experienced is this lament that has both anger and sadness in it, right? Your boundaries were trespassed. You have experienced loss. Those are both real. And if we don't let people mourn, we don't let people grieve and honor their grief, or if they don't know that they're allowed to grieve this, like, right? A lot of our society thinks grief is only connected when someone dies. There's so many losses and so many griefs. I think there's even a book called All My Losses, All My Griefs. And we need to let people know that it's okay to feel that, right? Because if we sublimate those emotions, they're just going to come out sideways sooner or later. So we can remind them and or give them permission. They get to feel their feelings. They get to mourn. And if we're good spiritual companions, maybe we can even sit beside them in the morning, right? And not rush them out of it, right? It is going to happen on a timeline, just like healing, just like forgiving. It's going to happen on a timeline that is unique for them. And then finally, after we've done establishment of safety and honoring the grief, then we can begin the process of reconnecting with ordinary life, right? For some people, this process has been kind of kicked down the road for decades, right? Like my 80-year-old woman who came in. And I think some of the best gift that we can offer people is to be willing to accompany them in this way. My last slide invites you to share with me, if you feel comfortable, what's one takeaway from this session, from this time together, that you think that you could incorporate, whether it's with, in a one-on-one relationship with a survivor in your life, or whether it's in your context of your faith community where you serve or lead. How can we steward the truth of these loved ones in our lives?
I like what Mela shared about everything, every aspect of a visit being consensual.
Yes.
But I also appreciate the just sitting with people in their mourning, because, yeah, there's probably a piece of me that's still doing that. So thank y'all for helping me give some voice to it tonight. But I don't ever want to explain away anything to somebody. I just want to be there for them. I can't fix them. They're the only ones that can heal themselves.
That's right. And with that, you have demonstrated that you are already more trauma informed than many clergy in our area. Thank you.
I was going to add that, for one, similar to what Holly just said, I like that last thing about those 3 stages. And the other one is I'd like to learn and practice some languaging. I heard you, Carrie, when Holly was sharing about her experience. You said something just so beautifully affirming. I'm sorry that happened to you. And then there was empathy that must have been very difficult, or whatever it was. Learning how to be empathic. And something that I learned about in CPSS training, to avoid the righting reflex, which is, I've got to fix you. I got to fix it.
Yes, yes, yes.
So I think my commitment would be that I'd like to learn and practice more so that those skills will come naturally for me when I need to have them available.
I think this is, Cheryl, you ask a good question. When you wonder if they are trying to get attention or hurt someone, do you mind clarifying for me if by hurt someone, if you mean like I'm trying to like ruin someone's reputation, hurt them, or are you talking about something more like hands-on kind of harm? Okay, reputation. Yeah. So it's a good question. Yes, we want to uh always believe, and um the data that's out there tells us that depending on which study we're looking at, somewhere between like 2 and 8% of allegations are false. So this like larger cultural narrative that we have, and you see it anytime there's something on the news, like Cosby, Weinstein, any of those kinds of like national news kinds of stories. You can see it in the comments of like social media and stuff, or sometimes you hear it, at your family member's dining table, like, well, why didn't they say something years ago? Or are they just trying to get money? Like, so that reflex is assuming that there's this like swath of people who are making up a story about their sexual harm in order to gain, I don't know what, but none of those folks make money from that. But they do bring on a ton of like unwanted attention, especially when it's like a national news story, right? So the folks in our lives who are telling us, statistically, it's very likely that they're telling us the truth and they're not telling us about like a false accusation. And even if like, your gut, your intuition, whatever, maybe this person, maybe they're prone to whatever, I still say default to believing them. And if there are these other extenuating circumstances that make you question whether or not this is completely true, it is still, all behavior is an attempt to meet a need. So if you have that kind of context with someone, then maybe the question is, I wonder what need they're trying to get met with this, right? But I do want to start with just believe. We believe survivors. Holding space for someone, detached compassion. That's true. I mean, in my training to become a professional chaplain, I don't need to know the truest truth or the rest of their story or whatever to be present to them in the moment of whatever's happening and be a supportive presence, right? It's very possible that in the hospital I held hands with and maybe even offered prayer for rapists without ever knowing it, because their loved one died or they were about to go into surgery. Thank you for asking the question. I know we're at time now, I think, aren't we? Are there any remaining questions or something you want to share that you feel like something you can incorporate now as a result of this training?
I have a question, not a comment.
Yes.
Of all of the things that we've been talking about today, all kind of revolving around this use empathy and trauma-informed care when we're talking with people. Are there resources that you have, resources that you can offer, additional conversations or trainings that you have that might be helpful for people?
Oh, thank you for teeing that up for me and reminding me. Yes. Yes, I can physically come to you or Zoom into you in your respective communities. Whether it's a leadership group or the whole population of your faith community. We do recommend that anyone who's involved with minors in their faith community, whether they're like paid staff or volunteer leading youth gatherings and stuff, should have some basic training in recognizing and responding to concerns of abuse and understanding when and how to report. I can offer that training for free. All of my services are free. And my grant tells me that I have to do X number of trainings. So it is no skin off my nose if you want me to come do another training. For generally learning more about the effects of trauma, I really love Bruce Perry and Oprah's book, What Happened to You? Basil van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score is excellent, and it's kind of dense. So you really kind of have to be a nerd who loves to read things like that, and you really want to like dig in and nerd out. It's a great resource. I think a much more accessible version of that is What Happened to You. Maybe just because Oprah takes Bruce Perry's wisdom and packages it into easily consumed media, as she does. But I think he offers a lot of anecdotes, but also kind of the explanation of the neurobiology behind what's happening to help us better understand how this is showing up and impacting people's lives. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you all for taking the time to come to this and asking questions and sharing and contributing. I think all of that really makes our time together that much more rich. So appreciate that. Mela has my contact information. So you're welcome to email me if you want me to answer any questions or come do a training where you are, or consult with you on a policy for safe spaces in your community. But thank you.
Appreciate you doing this for us.
Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.